All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our BCBA practice questions series, where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out behavioranalyst.study.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. A therapist is teaching a client to request a drink. At first, the client only requests after hearing "say drink." Over several sessions, the therapist reduces the prompt to "what do you want?" and eventually to a silent, expectant pause. Which of the following best explains this strategy? Now, we're looking at a strategy question. And what are we trying to accomplish with whatever strategy is being used? Well, the therapist is trying to teach the client to demand, right? They want them to request a drink. And they're using a prompting procedure to evoke that. So we know this procedure or the strategy involves this SD, a prompt, and a response. Now, the first prompt is "say drink." So the SD is shown, the prompt "say drink" is given. Then they start fading the prompt. The therapist starts fading the prompt to "what do you want?" So maybe the drink is presented and then the prompt, and then eventually a silent, expectant pause. So maybe the drink is presented and then no prompt, right? Or a pause altogether. So we're using prompts and we're fading prompts to try to evoke out saying drink or requesting the drink. Now, how would you explain this strategy? A, the therapist is using a modeling procedure to teach requesting. Well, the therapist is not modeling this. Say drink or what do you want is not modeling. Modeling, we are doing the exact behavior we want to see. What the therapist is doing is not modeling. B, the therapist is shaping the vocal response across sessions. Do we see reinforcement of approximations of behavior? We don't. And when there aren't approximations and reinforcement of approximations, it's very unlikely that we are looking at shaping in that question. C, the therapist is using a stimulus transfer control procedure. Yes. Now, what happens in a stimulus transfer control procedure? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. We're trying to transfer control from one stimulus to another. So initially, say drink has control over the behavior. We then transfer it to what do you want? We then transfer it to a pause or nothing. Fading prompts is probably the easiest way to think about stimulus transfer control. We've got our initial prompt, we then fade or we transfer control from that prompt to another prompt. And then once we fade out the prompt altogether, hopefully the SD has full control. D, the therapist is using a least to most prompting procedure. Well, they started with the most intrusive prompt and faded out to the least intrusive. So if anything, it would be most to least prompting. The best way to explain this strategy is a therapist is using a stimulus transfer control procedure by fading out these prompts. You're teaching a client to label common household items. During a session, you present a spoon and say, "What is this?" The client responds, "spoon," and you provide immediate praise and access to a favorite toy. Which change would represent the next best possible step in tact training to promote tacting from the client? This is why we have to read the questions carefully and slowly and attack the question without jumping to the answer choice. There's a lot going on here. It's very wordy. So let's just start with, what is the question asking? The question wants to know, what can we change to increase or improve tact training, right? Right now, we're starting at the very base level where we're teaching the client to label household items. So we're teaching them to tact these items. You present an item and say, "What is this?" Now, very basic labeling, right? What is this? Client says, "spoon." Now, a true tact is evoked by what? A true tact is evoked by a nonverbal stimulus. So we've got to remove "what is this" to promote true tacting. So if we want to get the next best possible step to promote tacting from the client, what should we do? A, fade out the reinforcement slowly to strengthen behavior. Well, this is not the behavior we want to strengthen. We don't want the label or the tact to be evoked by a verbal stimulus because it's no longer an actual tact. So strengthening this behavior is not necessarily what we want to see. B, remove the verbal cue, "what is this?" Yes. If we can present a spoon with no other cue and the client says "spoon," Now we're talking about tacting because we have these nonverbal stimuli evoking tacts. Eventually, we want the client to be able to just walk around their environment and tact stuff on their own. So if we want to promote tacting, we've got to get rid of these verbal cues. C, use the same object like the spoon repeatedly to increase fluency. Again, you might increase fluency for answering what is this, but it's not necessarily promoting tacting. D, change the verbal cue from what is this to tact this to teach a more relevant example. Well, now we're just shifting verbal cues and we're using actually a less relevant example because you could argue that tact this is never used in a natural environment. So D is not helping the cause. If we're going to promote tacting, we've got to remove verbal cues and get it to the point where the tact is evoked by a non-verbal stimulus. A middle school teacher announces to her class, if you finish your reading assignment before the bell, you can choose a free time activity. Several students complete their work and earn free time. Those who don't finish on time do not. This is an example of what? So we have a school teacher, and she tells the class, if you finish your reading assignment before the bell, you get to choose a free time activity. So since we have a class, we have this group contingency established. Now, we have different types of group contingencies, right? We have an independent group contingency, where if we had a group of 4, each person is responsible for their own reinforcement, right? They exist in a bubble. So each person is responsible for their own reinforcement. A dependent group contingency, we would have one person responsible for everybody's reinforcement, or a small group of that group responsible for everybody's reinforcement, the hero procedure. An interdependent group contingency, everybody is responsible for everybody else's reinforcement. So everybody has to engage in the behavior. In this case, when a student completes their work, they earn free time. Those who don't finish do not. So in this case, each student is relying on themselves to earn that activity. And when each person in the group is responsible for their own reinforcement, we call that an independent group contingency. Dependent group contingency would be if the class was relying on one person or a small sample of the class for reinforcement. And an interdependent group contingency would be if everybody in the class was required to finish the assignment before anybody got free time. But in this case, we're looking at an independent group contingency where each person is responsible for their own reinforcement. After implementing an intervention to increase a client's independent task completion, a behavior technician notices that the data path shows a highly variable pattern with no clear trend during intervention. When preparing the graph for the next team meeting, what will be the most appropriate recommendation for you to give as the supervising behavior analyst? Another long question. Let's just attack it. You are tasked with giving a recommendation about this graph. Now, this graph is showing what? It's showing a highly variable pattern with no clear trend. So it may look something like this, right? If we had our graph, it may go up and then drop down sharply, maybe increase sharply. And obviously this is all made up, but there's no real trend. It's up and down, it's variable. Long story short, the data aren't showing much about what is happening with independent task completion. So if you're a technician and you notice this and you have to tell your technician how to graph for the next team meeting, what are you going to recommend? A, smooth the data path by removing outlier data. Well, we can't just start removing data that messes up our data path, right? The advantage of a visual analysis of a graph is it can quickly tell us a lot about what is happening. If we've got this super variable graph, then maybe there's something going on in the environment that is preventing what we want to see. Maybe the intervention isn't effective. If we start removing data that we think is an outlier and that doesn't match what we're looking for, we're going to start changing the data to not represent what's actually going on. B, calculate the average from the data and display that instead of individual data points. Well, getting an average from a highly variable pattern is a bad idea because now that average is going to be very skewed by the highest and the lowest of data. So that data, if you take the average, is really not going to represent what is happening. C, continue plotting all data points accurately and as measured. Yes, they need to continue doing what they're doing. As long as they're taking data correctly, then they need to represent that data as it is happening each time they collect each data point. Don't change the data just because it doesn't agree with what you want to see. D, only graph the best and worst data points to remove any confounds. Again, we're not trying to remove data here. We're not going to biasedly pick which data to remove. They should continue plotting all data points accurately and as measured. During baseline, the average latency between the delivery of a demand and the initiation of a response is 14 seconds. A team implements an intervention involving high probability request, followed by the target instruction. After several days, the average latency decreases to 3 seconds. What is the most reasonable interpretation of this change? Don't overthink this question. It's very simple. We're looking for a reasonable interpretation of why the latency would go from 14 seconds to 3 seconds. Now, is that good? Well, in this case, yes, because they are responding more quickly to the demand. Latency is time between the SD and the response. So that time is shortening, which is good. Now, how would we interpret that progress based on this information? A, the client's overall response rate has increased, confirming that reinforcement is now more effective. Don't mix up response rate and response latency. Latency just tells us how quickly they respond, not necessarily how often they're responding. Their response rate might be through the roof, but if we're not lowering how quickly they're responding to the SD, then latency hasn't changed. B, the latency decrease suggests the intervention successfully reduced the delay between the instruction and the behavior. Now, seems too simple to be the correct answer, but it's exactly what we've done. The intervention, our high P request sequence, reduced the delay between the instruction and the behavior. That's what we were looking for. That's what we've done. B looks good. C, the intervention likely increased task difficulty, which reduced response accuracy, but improved latency. There's no indication that task difficulty increased at all. We're adding things that don't exist. D, the response effort was minimized through response cost or punishment procedures. Again, nothing in the question mentioned response cost or punishment procedures. If you read carefully and attack the question, C and D won't throw you off because you know there's nothing related to response cost or punishment in this question, so it can't be that answer. What is the reasonable interpretation? Well, latency decrease suggests the intervention successfully reduced the delay between the instruction and the behavior. Thanks for watching. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shoutout. Work hard, study hard, spread the word, and we'll see you soon.